Hi, Sarah Mack here from withsarahmack.com. And in today's episode, we're going to get deep and personal, and I'm going to give you a behind the scenes peek of some of the challenges that I've been through in my relationship over the past few years, behind the scenes of my business, and to really show you how much of a shit show my life has been behind the scenes for the past several years. You know, just in case you ever look at me and my business and think, oh, it's easy for her. She has an easy, amazing life, which I do in many ways. I fully acknowledge that and the privileges that I do get to enjoy. But it's definitely not been a walk in the park. And there has been a ton of growth and many lessons along the way. And I love talking about money and business. But ultimately, it all comes back to relationships, because our relationships are always the source of our greatest pain and our greatest pleasure, and really have the biggest influence on all of our abilities to birth the life that we dream of. And I always like to consider, money as one of our greatest teachers. But the truth is, the work that we do when we look at our relationship with money always comes back and shows up in the growth that we're being called to step into in our relationships with actual humans. So I'm going to talk about my key relationship with my favorite human of all, my partner, Albors. And because relationship is, also really a big topic of conversation with all of my clients. They come to me to help earn more money, to launch coaching offers, to launch their dream creative businesses. But in our relationships, that's like the number one place where we get to practice walking our talk, listening to and trusting ourselves, acknowledging and honoring our desires, asking for what we want, setting and keeping boundaries, which are really all of the most important skills that lead to more skill and success in business and money. So our relationships are our number one training ground, where we often we fall the hardest, right? So I've been feeling more called to talk about my relationship with Albors. It's something that it's one of my greatest successes in life. It probably is the greatest success of my life and has brought me more joy than anything else. And I get asked about it a lot. And so here we go. Let's dive in. We've really made it work despite all of the odds. And we've been in an international long distance relationship spanning across multiple countries, spending months and months and months apart. Also, we've been through 5 years of my ill health, going through chronic fatigue and burnout in my recovery from complex PTSD. And now we're going through Albors' medical residency during a pandemic in New York, working in the crazy hospitals here. So there's been a lot to navigate. The odds have definitely been stacked against us. But it's always, always, always been a very clear fuck yes from both of us. And the desire to be together has always been stronger than to give up the hassle of the constant, very big, very real, and very disruptive challenges to our lives as a result of, the different directions that we've both been going on. And it has for sure taught me patience and self-reliance, and also to really listen to myself more deeply. So I'm going to share some of our story, and I'm going to share some of the biggest lessons. So hopefully some of this will resonate with you and things that you've been through in your own relationships. So we've both had to make some really hard decisions of when to spend time apart, when to give up something else to be able to spend time together, while both navigating some very intense challenges individually. And there's been many ups and downs, many dramatic twists and turns over the last 7 years. And it all started when we met back in Montreal, when we were both doing our masters there. I wrote an ad on Craigslist for a roommate to move in with me and my best friend, Ali. And Albors rang on the doorbell, and he was the only person to answer our ad. And I was like, great, you'll do. And then he moved in. Then I fell in love with him. And we finally got together. And when we graduated, obviously neither of us were from Montreal, so our lives kind of went back in the trajectory of the place where they'd been before as we were moving on to the next phase, which for me was going back to Vancouver to work a summer in film production. And that was, the first period of long distance where I didn't see him for 6 months. We reconnected and went to Burning Man, which was literally the worst idea ever. When I was in the middle of a burnout, I was so exhausted. And it was quite the adventure. It was definitely worth it. I'm glad I went. But and then from there, we ended up in Bali, because that's where I decided to go next. And I convinced Albors to come along with me things completely fell apart in Bali. I was there for a job. He was supposed to be there to help out with my friend's business as well. Everything kind of went tits up. My friend got dengue fever. The whole business basically just like disbanded, and I found myself stranded in Bali. Alborz went back to North America to apply for medical school, which was his big dream. And so we didn't really know when we were going to see each other again. I knew I couldn't go back to film because I was so burnt out, and I just couldn't, and I didn't want to be working the long, 18-hour days on set. So we talked about opening up our relationship, if that was something that we needed to do to navigate the distance. And it was just a clear desire from both of us that neither of us wanted to do that. I was like, I can barely deal with myself, let alone anybody else. I was like going off to India to sit in the foothills of the Himalayas in Rishikesh to just meditate, yoga, and get better from my burnout while birthing my next phase as an entrepreneur, as a writer. So that was my plan. That's what I did. I went there, finally started getting some clients through, raised enough money to go back to England for a little bit, continue to recover my health, continue to build my income and build my, my business as a writer, as a copywriter. That calendar year, we were away from each other for a total of 11 months. And finally, I got my income to a place where I could afford to go back and rent in North America again. And so we reunited in Toronto for a month before moving to the US together because Alborz was starting medical school. I wanted to try and find a way to be in the US. Obviously, it's a notoriously difficult country to emigrate to. And so I applied to do an MA in poetry at NYU as a way to just get status. That's really what I did when I was in Canada. I applied to do my master's purely so that I had another visa and I could continue to live there. Ended up getting full funding and it all worked out for me really well. Same did not happen for me in the US. I got rejected. And I tried to live in Manhattan for a bit with a girl I met in India. That all fell apart pretty quickly. I think we were both going through still massive burnout, depression, struggle. I was a struggling writer in the early stages of my career. So my life in Manhattan was not at all glamorous. And so I moved to Brooklyn, gave that a shot. And then I just found that I was traveling upstate because Alborz was at school upstate to be with him at the weekends. And I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? Like none of my housemates were ever home. I was really lonely. Everyone just is like work. The struggle was real. So I moved upstate, even though I didn't really want to be living in Middletown in the middle of nowhere. But I actually, I enjoyed being surrounded by the countryside and just being able to be with Alborz and spend more time with him. But I was still really depressed because I didn't have a community there. The medical school community really wasn't my scene. And it'd just been a lot of moving around, a lot of instability, a lot of challenges. And so we decided that it was best for me to move back to Montreal for a year because things always go really well for me when I'm there. So I did that. I was also in the process. My postgraduate work permit was about to run out. I had 1 year left on that. So I was studying French. I'd failed the French test twice, which I needed to apply for residency so I could continue to stay, have status in Canada, which is, the country that I now considered my home after being there for so many years and my favorite country of all to spend time in. And I finally found an intensive course to get my certification, passed it, submitted my application for my residency, success. Obviously, there was like a year or so before that was going to be processed. So in the meantime, I applied for a new work permit. I went on vacation to visit Alborz in New York, who would now move to Beacon in the Hudson Valley. When I was there on vacation, I found out my work permit application got rejected. So I just figured I couldn't go back to Canada. I really didn't have another home. So I decided to stay in New York with Alborz, he was now in his, fourth year of medical school. And my friend Monique packed up all of my stuff from my apartment and drove it across the border from me. I had a phone call from the guy on the border being like, this looks like you're moving to America. And, he literally said to me, if you were Mexican, we wouldn't let you in, but because you're British, we don't have much trouble with you. So white privilege for you. It was lucky. I was lucky and privileged, systematically privileged. And I don't know if they could have come and kicked me out, maybe. So then I was staying in the US. I was doing border dashes to Europe. We took a trip to Argentina. We took a trip to Central America because I had to leave. Obviously, I wasn't a resident of the US, so I couldn't stay there over the long term. And all the meanwhile, I was still, building my business as a writer, building my income up from a very, very, very small income, starting at $5 gigs and, doing my money mindset work, putting my prices up, shifting my packaging and my marketing, and starting to attract the types of clients that, I really wanted to be focused on and specializing and getting really good at. And I still had my lingering health issues that I was working through and really, bringing my health back. Ended up traveling through 15 countries within a period of 5 years during this time. And by this point, I was like, I need a flipping green card if you're going to live here. So we decided to get married and start the application process for a green card, which is now entering its 4th year of processing, thanks to the many blessings of the pandemic. Hopefully we're near the end. And so this period has, involved a lot of uncertainty, a lot of instability, a lot of frustration, anxiety, a lot of time apart. And then the cherry on top of the cake, Albors began his medical residency as an obstetrician gynecologist at 2 hospitals in New York. And the most hellish year of our life ensued, seeing him so overworked, so exhausted, so unsupported by his program while we were, figuring out our life together in New York. The stress really affected me, and I allowed that to start to affect my business. It was, obviously adapting to living together in a new city, and in a city that is New York. It's very, very different from Montreal. And having no established support network, the financial pressures of having to adjust my spending in my business and my investing to be able to pay like 3 times more rent than I was paying previously. It was a big, big, big adjustment. And then that winter, I got the call that my granny was about to pass away. So I jumped on a plane back to the UK. I arrived at 6 a.m. in the morning on the day that she died, and I got to sit by her bedside with my mom as she passed away that evening. I'm so grateful I got to be there and see her one more time. And when I left, I told Albors, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, probably. But then there was a long wait for the funeral date, so I ended up staying a month. By then, the pandemic started. So I was unable to fly back into the US because the flights had been cancelled. Luckily, I'd already booked a flight, my return flight back via Montreal, because I wanted to use that opportunity of being outside the US to go and visit my friends. And by the time I landed in Montreal in March, I was straight into a 2-week quarantine, followed by not really being able to see any of my friends because of the lockdown, followed by the border closure between Canada and the US. And I ended up living in Airbnbs for 4 months, waiting for the border to be opened. I tried my luck at flying back to New York and I got refused, which was very traumatic. It was a very traumatic moment. And it was a really pivotal point for me because I also suddenly realized how this life being stuck in Canada in a pandemic was actually a break for my nervous system compared to our life in New York, and just being by his side while he was going through the stresses of the medical residency program. And then Albors was on the phone to me telling me how he was wishing that he could actually fall sick with COVID so he could have an opportunity to have some time out from the unrelenting stress of his work. And that's when I realized that things were really not good or healthy at all if the pandemic was bringing us more of a break from our normal lives. And I tried really, really hard to convince him to quit medicine altogether. Like I was at my breaking point at that point, and I was like, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. The sacrifices that you're making. And I was so frustrated by the abuse of the healthcare system and how they find it acceptable to treat their hospital workers. And it failed. It turns out he's really, really committed to medicine. And I finally accepted that, particularly to OB-GYN. He didn't want to switch up his program to one that had less hours or anything like that. So we went all in. Finally, I made it across the border, and we did our best to find a way to make the most of what time we had together during what was now his second year of his residency. Meanwhile, he had moved to a different apartment because he was relocated to a different hospital. So I came back to a completely different neighborhood, a completely different apartment. And on top of that, during the pandemic, during my time in Montreal, I had the experience in some energy healing work that I'd been doing of surfacing memories of sexual abuse that I had previously dissociated from. And the memories I hadn't had access to the memories until those moments. So I was, and I'd been re-triggered symptoms of PTSD. That was a very intense process. And so I was still continuing to heal, obviously, the symptoms and dealing with the ripple effects of that knowledge in my life and my personal relationships, and what I now understand had been complex PTSD, which I'd been suffering from throughout my burnout, which previously I hadn't known that that's what was going on. So without a close support community, and obviously by now being away from my family for more than a year, by that point, it was very challenging for me when Alborz, started hitting burnout from his work and just from the pressures of the pandemic of not having that downtime, not being able to really relax and recharge outside of his work, which I feel was probably one of the hardest things for the healthcare workers to go through, is not having your life outside of work to be able to recharge you, to go back in and do what was, obviously they were working under so much extra pressure during the pandemic. And Alborz was really my only one key player in my actual real world physical support system in New York. And then he was taken out, and it just was too much for me. I just didn't have the support that, I really needed in that moment. Both of our gas tanks were empty. There was really nobody around to help us refuel. We found it very challenging to, get together with people during the pandemic. Obviously, people are very reluctant, and with transit and everything being a risky place to be, just getting together with people was impossible. So I made the call, and I followed I had a massive breakdown. I had a massive meltdown, and really listened to my gut and listened to my instinct. And I called Alborz's parents to come and stay with him to keep him company while I took a trip back to Canada to visit my girlfriends. And it had been, 8 months since I was there previously. This would have been my third 2-week quarantine that I'd done, because I did a border dash in February where I went back to Ontario for 2 weeks. And, there was lots of risks involved with traveling during this time. Everything was in lockdown in Canada. Things were starting to open up again in New York. So many logical reasons really pointed to me not going, but I just knew it was the right thing to do. Like I really just felt called that this was the right thing to do. So I rented a car. I drove up to the border, and I walked across in the snow to avoid the hotel quarantine, which was going on if you fly in, and sounded like just such a hot mess that I didn't want to deal with. So I learned that if you walk across the border, then you could avoid that. So I did that. I couldn't find a car that I could take all the way into Canada, so I had to drop it off 30 minutes from the border, get a taxi, and then my friends picked me up on the other side. And it was spring, but for some reason, it was just one of those days where it snowed. I was like, of course. I was standing there in line behind all the cars, being covered in snow. And I immediately felt just like the loving, mothering arms of Canada, and standing in the line. People were just like waving me ahead of them. One guy got out of his car and like gave me a pair of gloves, and everybody was just, being really Canadian and like super amazing. So my friends picked me up on the other side. They dropped me at my Airbnb to quarantine for another 2 weeks. And then finally things started to open up in Montreal, and I got to spend some real quality time with my girlfriends, which was just exactly what I needed. And so I really noticed that whenever I honor my needs and desires, whenever I listen to that, whenever I take action on it, even if it makes no logical sense or seems to be highly, highly inconvenient or risky in some way, it always leads to better. It always leads to better. And our relationship always becomes so much stronger, even if it feels like a difficult decision to make in the moment. And, there have been Alborz's friends who have called me selfish for leaving, or who just can't understand how we are spending time apart without considering it a separation. But even though obviously it was hard for him to have me leave, he always understands and is supportive in the end. And it's really not been easy going through a drawn out immigration process and basically building an entire life in a community in a new city, especially in New York, where people are super busy and often overworked, and especially in pandemic, where just gathering was, a whole other level of challenge, because not everybody has a car. And so, these are the key lessons really from these recent challenges. Really dealing with the stress of Alborz's current career has required me to create very clear emotional, energetic, mental, and physical boundaries from his experience, and to really let go of and not take on the very real stress and physical burdens of the crazy workload that he experiences every week. And, obviously working to minimize the impact that has on our relationship and our home life. It has led me to learning how to really honor my needs emotionally and physically, and to not use his struggle or lack of availability as an excuse to not live my life to the full, or to put my desires on hold just because he's having to put his desires on hold to prioritize this phase of his career. And just because he's being forced to sacrifice on many levels doesn't mean I have to. And that's been something that I've really had to work at, separating myself from. I've had to let go of a lot of resentment and frustration over the US medical system, which is something I have zero control over at this point, and to really let go of the stories that were making me unhappy and were, degrading my quality of life, in feeling so powerless and wanting to do something about it. So I had to let go of that and just focus on being happy. And I had to accept that, this is a sacrifice of his health and personal life that Alborz has chosen to make. And if he's okay to see that through, then all I can do is support that. And I learned that me being stressed about his life, trying to fix his problems, actually helped neither of us. Even when I was trying to force feed him when he didn't have time to eat in the first year, it didn't help. I mean, it probably helped a bit, but the stress that it brought definitely didn't help. And I learned that, the best support I can be to him is to live the life that allows me to thrive, in the ways that make me the strongest, the healthiest, and the happiest. And, Alborz is amazing. He's my hero. He rarely ever lets anything get him down, despite the massive stack of bullshit that gets thrown his way on a daily basis. And, things that I will easily lose my shit over. He just gets on with life. He's so appreciative, and he's always looking for reasons to be happy and enjoy life. And that's really how he's so resilient, and he's able to go through these intense challenges. And that's something that really inspires me. And now I really see that everything, when it comes down to our personal power and our ability to create a life that makes us happy, it's all down to boundaries. And it's always the boundaries in our closest relationships. Those are the ones that are the most revealing when it comes to our patterns of self-sufficiency and personal power. And going through these growing pains has led me to claim back and be able to more consistently maintain and manage my energy. And that has brought so much more freedom and capacity to go bigger in my business and create opportunities for myself in even easier and more confident ways. Because now I'm even better at knowing how to meet my own needs and how to set and maintain boundaries that allow me to show up for that work as gracefully as possible. And I talk a lot about relationships with my high-level clients, because when you're working on your money stuff, your triggers and emotional patterns and habits all show up in your relationships most predominantly. And some of the biggest topics that come up around relationships and money, are really, really related to business. So boundaries, like how are you managing and focusing your energy? And it's so easy to get caught up in the drama of a relationship, to sidetrack from taking those big, scary actions that move us towards our goals and dreams. And that's usually what's going on when we're in some type of relationship drama we're giving our energy to. And another topic is transparent and authentic communication, and really creating the emotional freedom to be yourself in your business and in your relationships, because how you are in one shows up in the other one too. And asking for what you want, right? Having those conversations, whether it's the money, the types of clients, or in your relationship, really listening to your desires, honoring that, and asking for that to be met. Recognizing that when we ask for what it is that we desire, actually it's a win-win for everybody, because we get to show up better, we get to show up bigger, we have so much more to give than when we sacrifice that unwillingly. And it really always comes back to owning our desires, which is huge in relationships, because one thing that I've seen is all of these challenges that we've been through, it's not ever been an issue with our relationship. It's only ever been an issue with us as individuals, where we haven't been meeting our own needs, or we've been making sacrifices that we weren't prepared to make. That has led to the stress and the pressure on our relationship. When both of us, we are taking care of ourselves as individuals, we're meeting our own needs and taking responsibility for that, the relationship flourishes, and it's so much more fun and it's so much more easy. So the biggest struggle for me has definitely been managing energetic boundaries as a recovering people pleaser, and also an opportunist who loves to say yes to things, who loves to connect with people, who loves to experiment and try new things. Historically, I've been a big fat yes to anything and everything. I love helping others. I love new experiences. I love trying new things. I love my work. I love my hobbies. I love the people in my communities. I love the opportunity to be able to move to a different place, experience something new. And, me prioritizing that excitement over really taking deep care of my own personal needs has been, caused me burnout, and started to show up in other ways, like prioritizing and accommodating other people's needs and priorities before I had fully taken care of and taken responsibility for meeting my own needs first. I have, found myself in patterns. Even with roommates, I would be thinking and obsessing about other people's problems when there were plenty of things for me to be focused on and working on to better my own life and situation first. And obviously, this is something that's shown up for me a lot in my relationship with Albors after moving in together more permanently. As someone who is empathetic, I'm very sensitive to what he's going through, which, when he's been going through a lot of stress, like I have actually felt that in my body. Even if there was nothing going on with me, like I would have very visceral reactions to when he was feeling very stressed or very pressured, which started to obviously become a lot more frequent when he began his residency program. And there have been times where I found it very challenging to prevent that stress from impacting my energy and allowing it to impact how I was showing up in my business, when really our energy is our currency and our power. And when we allow it to leak out, because we're the only one that's in control of that, and we don't focus on very stringently protecting it, it becomes harder to move with momentum in the direction that we really desire to be going in. And things start to feel very scattered. And that's been a big learning curve for me, and it still is. But knowing what those boundaries are for myself that allow me to stay strong has allowed me to make them more non-negotiable, deeply embedded habits that I know have to be there for me to be able to continue to function at the level of the capacity that I've now created as a result of that deepened self-care and vigilance around taking care of my needs. And that is my responsibility to uphold that for myself. And I had a really big breakthrough simultaneously while all of this was going on, when I was having that big meltdown where it felt like everything was just too much and I needed to go and spend time with Montreal. Like that, the month leading up to that was so much pressure. And I was really, the signs and the signals were there. And obviously it took a little while for me to really listen to them. But while I was going through those challenges in my personal life, I had the breakthrough, which hadn't been the case in previous years, that I can still thrive simultaneously in my business, even though I'm experiencing big challenges in my personal life. And I really proved that to myself this year, where, it was one of the hardest months in the pandemic. And I was really, healing my trauma and triggers. There was some deep, really just like bandwidth consuming work going on. I hadn't been able to visit my best friends or my family for so long. Albors was so burnt out from working at the hospital. I still, that month, had one of my best months in income. But previously, I would have let all of that stuff get in the way. And now I know it doesn't have to. And that's really why I love to go deep into the topic of energy management in all areas with my clients, because it's everything. Our energy is everything. And relationships is, there are so many lessons to be learned when we lean into that discomfort and we allow ourselves to look at it and we take 100% responsibility for how we're feeling in that relationship, and we make the changes to support ourselves, whether they're a mindset shift and a focus shift on the story that we're telling, whether they're very real boundaries that we set, physically in order to be able to set better boundaries emotionally. Now, I'm getting better and better at being able to hold the emotion that I desire to be living in during my day, or moving through the waves of more challenging times, because I give myself permission to use the tools and the support systems and to make sure that they're there. So it's easier for me to bounce back, and I don't let it knock me down. So I hope that you have found some nuggets of wisdom and things that have inspired you to go deeper and look at whatever is going on in your own personal boundaries and relationships, to take better care of yourself and to take more responsibility for feeling good, no matter the shit show that's going on around you or the challenges that life brings your way. And if you're interested in going deeper into this conversation with me on what that next level looks like for you, my private one-on-one mentorship is open, and I'm here for all of that conversation as alongside all of the business and money stuff. And same in Freedom Club, which is my mastermind, where there's tons of other amazing women entrepreneurs all going through the same step, leveling up in business, choosing to shift to more fun and more freedom and more emotional freedom on every level, financially, in relationships, and the way we do business. I'm also running a free workshop on channeling that energy into the art of magnetic messaging for attracting those dream clients, making easy 5-figure sales. So definitely send me a message if you want to catch that. Please, I would love to hear your comments. And if you head over to withsarahmac.com and you click on podcast, you can go and please leave me a 5-star review so that we can get this content out there to more people who will benefit from it. And feel free to leave comments around any other topics that you'd be really interested to hear me talk about on the show. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe in all the places, and I will see you next week. Bye. For more inspirational content, head over to my website, withsarahmac.com, and please support the show by liking, commenting, and subscribing.